Is there a reason why they never reveal the temple instead of revealing the physical temple, using landscape to kind of bring it out that Buddhism idea?
It's very clearly that's why it looks like a landscape poem, because landscape replaces the temple. Nature replaces the physical, the artifice of the buildings, right? Even though the temple space, these are probably the temple grounds, right, does exactly the same thing the temple should do.
It's kind of like a landscape painting where you have all these mountains and then you have the finial, a little bit of finial like hidden behind the bushes and the high mountains in the landscape painting. It's sort of, and you sort of knew, you see the steps going up and going somewhere, but you don't actually see the architecture of the building.
Yeah, and here the architecture is all hidden. You know it's supposed to be there, so you can imagine.
Here's the bell.
It's the bell. The one thing is the sound, and a sound which has resonance. Every time you cast a bell, you'd have to have a bell inscription, and every bell inscription will not say exactly the same thing, but it has to make that point. This is to teach you of the emptiness of things.
This reminds me of Tao Yuanming's poem, like 心源地自偏. Like if you have the Buddhism thoughts in heart, no matter where you are, that's the temple.
Yeah. Well, probably for Tao Yuanming, it wouldn't be Buddhism, but certainly there's the way, right? That's missing. I guess that's a really good association, because of course, if you remember how that poem opens, it opens with, "I built my cottage in a realm of men, but heard no sound of," and so then he picks a chrysanthemum, and then looks up to the mountain. But what doesn't he see? He hides the village. He tells us the village is there, but he doesn't see it, right? And then quite literally after that, in this Tao Yuanming poem, he looks down and he looks up, but he misses the whole world in between. And here Wang Wei probably did see the physical temple, but is not seeing it, right? Is erasing it somehow from his vision.
It's also like you have to see it to not see it.
Yeah, you have to. That's the truth of the beginning of it. And here he has to name the temple to, sort of hide it.
Yeah, I feel like with the Tao Yuanming poem, it's a form of escape. He's trying to get away from the realm of men, whereas here it's not an escape, you're replacing it.
Replacing it, very much so. Your temple grounds do the same service that the building was, and very successfully so.
I guess what I wanted to ask then is, as a reader of this poem, are we supposed to be participating in the poem as Wang Wei is participating in the landscape? Is this supposed to be inspiring passions in us? Are we...
Well, certainly it shouldn't be inspiring passions.
Are we supposed to be controlling those passions in the same way that he does? Like, if this landscape is supposed to be a temple, should we, as the reader, be walking through that temple and going through the same religious experience?
When you read it, you're not going through the same religious experience, but you are following his religious experience. So that it becomes a template for learning to pay attention, right? And part of the way that poetry is transmitted is you read the poem, you're moved by it, you're touched by it, but you learn to pay attention in the same way the poet pays attention. You learn to think of things, the sequence of things, as meaningful. Otherwise, I walked into the mountains, I heard a bell, I went down the mountain, and I sat by a pool. And that is what it says, but of course, it doesn't just say that. It's not heavily symbolic or anything, but it's a process.
Is there a reason why, I guess, this discrepancy between using a bell sound and the title of the poem, Incense? Like maybe he could have used smell to...
Well, when you think of incense here, there's no way around it in English. But incense is also the visible smoke.
Okay.
Even more than the smell.
Okay.
So what you have is you do have the space of cloudy peaks, right?
Yeah.
And so it's visually it's a hard, you can only see close up. Right? And then in that sort of hidden landscape, you hear the bell, which I believe, no, it's not. There's one more sound. That's the choking of the water over the...
Yeah.
You often can see how things are organized, so you have, the sound and color is a standard. So you have sound and sight.
This also made me think about the literati culture in China, like because it's really competitive. Not many people can get into official positions, but then there's an alternative literati culture, right?
And in case of Wang Wei, of course, it's quite special because he was a Taiyuan Wang,
Yeah.
one of the great clans. This is before, maybe before literati culture in our common sense, right? This is a world of aristocratic culture. You have Wang Wei from a great family. His brother was chief minister later on. You know, this is amazing. But he turned his, and he was part of the courts early on. He wrote for the emperor, he wrote for the princes, but he turned away from, you know, that world and was fascinated by a quiet world, the world of the landscape.
So I was thinking maybe like in later years, when the educated man read this poem, it would kind of resonate with them.
Oh yeah, it would resonate with him.
Yeah.
In a very different way though. You know, Chinese poetry was very durable. And it, as it also shaped sensibility, it survived vast changes going on in Chinese society. And I think I've mentioned some of the, one question I received was much missed from the Chinese to English translation. And I think I mentioned the ambiguity of the first line. Chinese can be very ambiguous. And of course you notice there's no pronouns here. You don't expect to find pronouns. But when you say, stopping by the Temple of Incense Mast, you often, unless you indicate otherwise, mean I stopped by. And then you would read this as a first-person subject going through the experience. But that absence of the pronoun or certain absence of certain things makes it easy to reuse lines. So that you're, you know, if you were in the mountains, you might say and heard a bell, you could recite this line, and it would be the same thing.